In 2025, choosing between Debian and Mint LMDE could make or break your workflow. Forget what you think you know about these Linux titans. One quietly pulled ahead for very specific users. Today, we'll expose the surprising truth: performance, features, and the hidden traps of Debian 13 and LMDE 7, so you can pick the right distro for your real needs. Are you running the wrong Linux distribution for your needs in 2025? One distro gives creators an edge. The other is unmatched at long-term stability. Let's cut through the noise and reveal which one deserves a spot on your machine. Quick summary. Short version. Debian 13, Trixie, is the conservative, security-focused base with a huge package set and fresh core tooling. LMDE 7, Gigi, is Mint's Debian-based desktop experience. Same Debian foundation, but with Mint polish, cinnamon tweaks, and a desktop-first feature set. If you want rock-solid server/workstation stability, Debian wins.
If you want an immediately comfortable desktop tuned for daily use, LMDE 7 is the friendlier pick. The contenders, what they actually are. Debian 13 Trixie, the upstream stable Debian release with updated desktops, GNOME 48, KDE Plasma 6 series, newer toolchains, and architectural additions, RISC-V. It's built for generality, correctness, and maintainability. LMDE 7 Gigi, Linux Mint's Debian edition. It uses Debian 13 as the base, but layers Mint's Cinnamon desktop and Mint utilities to deliver a more curated desktop experience, with a focus on out-of-box friendliness. Recent LMDE 7 beta builds use a modern kernel series, 6.1, and Cinnamon maintenance aligned to Mint expectations. First impressions and out-of-box experience. Aesthetics and workflow. Debian's default images are plain by design. Minimal GNOME KDE setups with upstream defaults. LMDE loads Cinnamon with Mint's polish. Applets, settings, and UI tweaks that many users find familiar and ready to work with immediately. New user friendliness. LMDE aims to reduce friction, media codecs, Mint tools, while Debian expects you to configure and pick tools. For a desktop audience that wants less initial tinkering, LMDE has the advantage. Under the hood. Kernels, packages, desktops. Debian 13 ships with a modern userland and desktop stacks, GNOME 48, Plasma 6.x, and the project backports and curates security hardening measures across AMD 64/ARM 64. It's also expanding architecture support, notably RISC-V 64. LMDE 7 inherits Debian 13 packages, but pairs them with Cinnamon, Mint's desktop, and tends to include a newer kernel in its ISOs for broader hardware compatibility, 6.12 reported in LMDE 7 beta builds. That kernel choice improves support for recent CPUs/GPUs and laptop power management out of the box. Installation and first boot. Debian. The installer is powerful but intentionally granular, partitioning choices, init or MFS options, and fewer automatic conveniences. Expect to manually add codecs, some firmware, and multimedia stacks. LMDE. Installer is simpler for desktop users, and the ISO usually includes Mint helper tools and media conveniences, so your first boot is less Linux admin and more desktop ready. Resource use on fresh boot. Both can be lightweight depending on desktop choice, Cinnamon versus a minimal GNOME setup. In practice, LMDE's Cinnamon will use a bit more RAM than a minimal Debian XFCE install, but the difference is modest on modern hardware. Performance and daily use benchmarks. App launch and responsiveness. Debian with lightweight DEs will feel fastest on low-end hardware. LMDE's Cinnamon is well optimized and feels snappy on typical laptops. For raw snappiness, choose the lighter desktop on Debian. For balanced desktop ergonomics, LMDE is excellent. Gaming. Both are capable. Gaming performance mainly depends on kernel, GPU drivers, and Proton/Steam runtime versions. LMDE's newer kernel in the ISO can mean better out-of-box GPU support for Steam titles. Debian users may need to enable backports or install a newer kernel manually. Battery and power management. Recent kernels, like 6.12, bring better power features and improved scheduler behavior,
on modern Intel/AMD mobile CPUs, an area where LMDE's shipping kernel can offer a practical advantage without extra setup. Software ecosystems and package management. Both use apt, dpkg, and Debian repositories at base. LMDE points to Debian, but layers Mint packages and tools. So dependency resolution and repository scale are effectively Debians, but Mint curations make desktop apps and UI tools easier to discover. Modern app formats. Both work with Flatpak and AppImage. Snap is more Ubuntu-centric, but can be used. LMDE tends to present Flatpak integration and GUI helpers more prominently for non-technical users. Driver and firmware handling. Debian is conservative with firmware inclusion for licensing reasons. LMDE ISOs often include non-free firmware, so wireless and GPUs just work more often on first boot. Stability, security, and maintenance. Debian's value is long-term stability, predictable upgrades, and thorough security practices. Trixie introduced additional mitigations and hardening that matter for workstation and server security postures. LMDE receives Mint team fixes and desktop-focused patches. It's stable for daily desktop use, but you're relying on Mint to repackage or patch desktop integrations atop Debian. Who wins for which use cases? Servers' long-term stability. Pick Debian 13. If you value reduced churn, architecture support, and conservative maintenance, it's the better foundation. Daily desktop, content creators, casual users? LMDE 7. Faster to set up, friendlier defaults, and newer kernel out of the box for recent hardware.
Developers. Either works. Debian for reproducible server parity. LMDE if you want an immediately usable desktop with less setup overhead. Gamers. LMDE's newer kernels and bundled firmware usually mean fewer headaches for GPU drivers and Steam. Practical recommendations and closing. If you want a minimalist, build-it-yourself system or plan to run production servers, install Debian 13 and use selective backports or a curated kernel when you need newer hardware support. If you want a ready desktop that just works with polished Cinnamon UI and fewer manual steps, try LMDE 7, especially if you're upgrading from an older Mint release. Final note, both projects are healthy in 2025. Your decision should be guided by whether you prefer upstream purity and conservative stability, Debian, or polished desktop readiness and convenience, LMDE.
Thanks for watching, and I will see you in tomorrow's video. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe for daily videos. Bye.